black water, keep on rolling.
Mississippi moon, won't you keep on shining on me?
Oh, black water, keep on rolling.
Mississippi moon, won't you keep on shining on me?
Oh, black water, keep on rolling.
Welcome to New Spheres. I'm Randy Elstrott. In 1983, psychologist and author Dr. James Dobson released his groundbreaking book, Love Must Be Tough. In this book, Dr. Dobson exhorts parents, husbands, and wives to set boundaries and act harshly and decisively when those boundaries are trespassed by wayward loved ones. He coached his readers that although such boundaries and subsequent consequences may look like and feel like tyrannical meanness, it is not. It is actually another facet to love. You see, it is a higher level of love when one can enforce the excruciating pain of a moment for a truer, greater, and farther-reaching joy in the future. Any single act of discipline can be labeled harsh or mean by those who can't see past the pain of the moment. We are like the blind man in the previous blog who tries to describe an elephant by feeling the part of the elephant in front of him. He can only give a very limited description. When we view an act of discipline and our view moves past the pain of the moment into the redeemed future, we no longer classify it as an act of meanness. We now see it as an act of love. The key to understanding any act of discipline is to understand the redemptive virtue of the act. That's an important phrase, redemptive virtue. And it's one we're going to want to remember. The redemptive virtue of an act is the grand result for which the seemingly evil act is acceptable and warranted. For instance, let's say 6-year-old Johnny had his favorite dinosaur toy confiscated by his mom. Now, Johnny loved that toy. He played with it night and day, and it brought him great joy. Taking that toy seems like an act of terrible meanness. But Johnny's mom had a reason for taking that toy. You see, Johnny previously took his sister's favorite baby doll and hid it on her. Johnny's mom got the baby doll back, then she took the dinosaur to cause a brief time of pain in Johnny's life. From that time on, when Johnny was tempted to take something of his sister's, he remembered the pain of briefly losing his dinosaur toy, and he left well enough alone. There is the redemptive virtue in the confiscation of Johnny's dinosaur toy. The grand result of this act of discipline was a more obedient Johnny and an overall happier family, including Johnny. If our view is limited to the simple act of taking his toy away, it appears to be an act of meanness. But if we widen our view to see the changes this act brought, we find that it improved the futures of Johnny, his sister, and his mom. It was not at all an act of meanness. It was a wise act of love. In the previous blog, we saw that the prophet Nahum, like the blind man and the elephant, had a very limited view to the Father. As a result, his description of the Father was incomplete. He used the following words to describe the Father: jealous, avenging, wrathful, filled with indignation, unforgiving toward the guilty. We would not use any of those words to describe Jesus, and yet we know the Father looks exactly like Jesus. We have no choice but to conclude that the Holy Spirit ascribes a higher meaning to these words when they are applied to the Father. One could say these words are anthropomorphic. Now, I'm sorry about that word. I know that's a big word. But when we break it down, it will begin to make sense to you. Anthrop means human. For instance, anthropology is the study of humanity, and philanthropy is the love of humanity. Morphos means to change form, such as in the metamorphosis of a caterpillar to a butterfly. When we combine anthrop with morphos, we get a word that means to change into a human. Anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic words and phrases change their subject into a human for the purpose of conveying a thought. For instance, the following sentences are anthropomorphic. The mountains awoke with the innocence of children. Now, we all know mountains don't wake up, humans wake up. But the thought of mountains waking like children gives us a clear picture of beautiful innocence. How about this? The trees in the field clapped their hands. Now, trees don't have hands, people do. This description gives us a picture of a forest filled with vibrant movement. What Nahum, in his limited viewpoint, meant by the word wrath is not the same as what the Holy Spirit meant by the word wrath. The Holy Spirit used the word wrath and all Nahum's other words as anthropomorphisms. They are not to be understood literally. God is no more jealous or unforgiving than a mountain awakens or a tree claps its hands. To find the Holy Spirit's meaning of the word wrath, we must find the redemptive virtues of the various acts of God's wrath. Once we do this, we will see that the act was not done out of meanness or anger or jealousy or unforgiveness. It was done out of love. The word wrath, when applied to God, conveys other thoughts, just as waking with the innocence of children conveys beauty and trees clapping their hands conveys movement. In the following audio blogs, we will isolate God's wrath and compare and contrast it with human wrath. We'll discover 5 major differences between God's wrath and human wrath. These differences are so pronounced that it will become clear that God's wrath is not truly wrath at all. You don't want to miss this.